Welcome to NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US President Donald Trump said Ukraine will need Patriot missiles for defense after a call with President Volodymyr Zelensky, according to media reports. Meanwhile, United Nations has condemned the Russian drone assault on Ukraine. Gaza Civil Defense said that Israeli strikes have killed 32 people in Gaza. Meanwhile, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has said 2 U.S. aid workers were injured in a grenade attack at a food distribution site in Gaza. No group has claimed the attack, according to media reports. Hamas has said it is ready to begin U.S.-sponsored Gaza ceasefire talks immediately as Israel's security cabinet prepares to meet Saturday evening to decide its response, according to media reports. Lebanon says Israeli strikes killed 1 person and wounded 6 others in southern Lebanon despite a ceasefire with Hezbollah, according to local media reports. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party shakeup was overshadowed today by his own party's official Francisco Salazar's resignation over sexual harassment allegations, according to media reports. Palestine Action co-founder Huda Amouri has lost a bid to hold the UK government's decision to ban the group as a terrorist organization. London police have arrested protesters today as the ban took effect at midnight local time, according to media reports. Paris has opened the river Seine for public swimming today for the first time since 1923 after a major cleanup, according to media reports. 3 sites will host over 1,000 swimmers daily until 31st of August. Pope Leo has taken his first public step to address clergy sexual abuse by appointing French Archbishop Thibault Werny as president of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Werny has vowed to strengthen the church's safeguarding measures amid global scandals. UN Human Rights Office has said that U.S.-Israeli-backed aid points in Gaza seem to have become killing sites. The organization has recorded about 509 deaths over a month, from May 27th to June 27, at the aid distribution points run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Meanwhile, more than 100 others were killed in attacks near humanitarian convoys of the GHF, a private organization backed by the U.S. and Israel, according to Ravina Shamdasani, the spokeswoman for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Let's listen in to what she has said.
So the latest figures that we have recorded 613 killings, both at GHF points and near humanitarian convoys. Now, this is a figure as of the 27th of June. On who is responsible, it is clear that the Israeli military has shelled and shot at Palestinians trying to reach the distribution points. How many killings, who is responsible for that, we need an investigation.
This comes after over 165 non-governmental organizations issued a joint statement calling for immediate actions to end the GHF. The statement stated that the Israeli-US scheme under the guise of providing aid is causing chaos and violence, resulting in the deaths of over 500 innocent Palestinians in just weeks. Now we are joined by our guest, Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us. What does it mean for the credibility of humanitarian operations if aid distribution sites are turning into killing sites, according to what the UN has said?
The reality is that civilians are desperate for aid, so they'll continue to line up even if there is the risk of civilian casualties as Israel and Hamas continue to fight. We just have to keep in mind that one of the reasons why there's gunfire near the aid distribution sites is Hamas continues to embed itself with or behind civilians, leading to hostile fire from the Israeli Defense Forces. So it's very much up to Hamas. Hamas could disengage from areas where there is humanitarian aid distribution, and hopefully that will lead to a safe process for civilians to receive this aid.
And how should the US and Israel respond to these UN findings about the safety of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites, according to you?
The reality is Israel and the United States are either going to deny any accusations or they're simply going to ignore it. Israel has long felt that the United Nations and organizations that are part of the UN system are not neutral parties when it comes to disputes between Israel and Hamas. And Israel has made that very clear by some of its actions throughout the course of the war, such as banning the UNRWA from operating in Gaza. So there's not a very good relationship when it comes to Gaza issues between the United States and Israel on one side and the United Nations on the other. What we have to watch out for would be if the ceasefire agreement is actually reached, would the Israelis allow United Nations affiliated organizations to resume providing aid in Gaza, or would it only allow other organizations not affiliated with the UN to resume providing aid in Gaza?
Thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. One civilian has been killed and at least 5 others injured in 3 Israeli strikes on southern Lebanon, in what Lebanese officials call the latest breach of a fragile ceasefire. Lebanon's health ministry says an Israeli drone targeted a vehicle in Bint Jbeil, killing 1 person and wounding 2 others. Separate strikes in Sheba and Chakra left 3 more injured, 2 of them seriously. Israel has yet to comment on the attacks, which come despite a ceasefire agreement signed last November. Since then, Lebanon has reported nearly 3,000 Israeli violations, with more than 215 dead and over 500 wounded in the conflict, which escalated into full-scale war last year, has already killed thousands and displaced over 1 million people. Now we are joined back by Ross Feingold. Ross, thank you for staying with us. What does this latest attack mean for the future of the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon?
It shows that Israel is going to continue to take action when it has intelligence that Hezbollah is moving material and weapons into positions that pose a threat to Israel. So notwithstanding the ceasefire agreement, when Israel feels that its northern territories are at danger from Hezbollah attack, that Israel will take appropriate action to eliminate the threat from Hezbollah. So, very similar to Gaza, where a lot of the blame is with Hamas. In southern Lebanon, a lot of the blame is with Hezbollah. If they continue to move weapons into positions that could threaten Israel, Israel will continue to take action.
Thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we stay in the region. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he expects Turkey to be readmitted into the US F-35 program, following what he calls an agreement with President Donald Trump. Speaking on his return from Azerbaijan, Erdogan told reporters that he believes the F-35 jets will be delivered to Turkey step by step during Trump's term. The US had removed Turkey from the program in 2019 after Ankara purchased Russian S-400 missile systems, which also triggered sanctions. But ties appear to be warming again, with the US ambassador to Ankara saying sanctions could be lifted by the end of the year. Erdogan framed the issue as more than just military, calling it a matter of trust and partnership within NATO and the global stage. Now we go back to our discussion with Ross Feingold. Ross, what would Turkey's return to the F-35 project mean for its relationship with the United States as well as NATO partners, and how realistic is this?
This is not just a question of defense preparedness for Turkey. It really is very much a political question, and what kind of relationship Turkey wants to have with the United States as well as with some of the European countries. At times, Turkey has wanted to have a very independent foreign policy. It's wanted to maintain its close relationship with Russia by purchasing Russian missile systems, and that really angered the United States and Turkey's NATO allies. So Turkey really has to make the political decision. Is it fully committed to a relationship with NATO and with the United States, or is it going to continue to pursue a policy where it also wants to have warm relations with Russia, even though its closest friends and allies are telling Turkey that this is inappropriate? So it's really up to one man. It's up to President Erdogan. Whose side does he want to be on? Does he want to maintain the relationship with the United States and with NATO, or does he want to prioritize a relationship with Russia? At the moment, it looks like he's now decided that his relationship with the United States and NATO is far more important than anything he could gain from a relationship with Russia.
Thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we stay in the region. Turkish President Erdogan says peace talks with the Kurds will gather pace once PKK rebels begin laying down their arms. Speaking after an economic summit in Azerbaijan, Erdogan said a new era could begin once the PKK follows through on its promise to disarm, with a symbolic ceremony expected between July 10th and 12th in Iraqi Kurdistan. The group officially ended its decades-long armed campaign in May. Erdogan also announced plans to meet with the pro-Kurdish DEM party to discuss the next phase of the peace process, a meeting expected to include Turkey's intelligence chief. He called the disarmament a potential turning point for security, democracy, and regional development, and vowed to build a terror-free Turkey. Now we go back to our discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Could this potential turning point bring real security and economic benefits to Turkey, as well as Turkey's Kurdish regions?
Certainly, the end of hostilities will bring about more investment, stability, economic opportunity, and ultimately economic growth, not just for Turkey as a whole, but also its southeast region where the Kurdish rebellion has been going on for many decades. I still think it's early days in this peace process. The PKK is talking about laying down its weapons, but what kind of monitoring mechanism to ensure that both sides are talking about the same thing? I think that really remains to be seen. And what also remains to be seen is what Turkey's posture is going to be towards Kurds and Kurdish armed groups, both in Syria as well as Iraq, where for many years Turkey pretty much at will has taken military action within Syria or within Iraq when it says that it feels threatened by armed Kurdish groups. So there are a lot of elements to this peace process that have yet to be worked out. I think we could be cautiously optimistic, though, and we could hope for a brighter future.
Thank you so much, Ross Feingold, for staying with us throughout all of our news. Now we move on to our next news. OPEC is set to ramp up petrol production next month. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and 6 other key members of the alliance have announced a bigger than expected hike in oil output for August, boosting supply to 548,000 barrels per day. The move comes as petrol prices remain under pressure globally, with rates hovering around $65 to $70 per barrel. Analysts had anticipated a smaller increase, but the group cited strong market fundamentals and low inventories as key reasons behind the decision. Experts say this signals a strategic shift towards gaining market share and away from supporting prices, with petrol demand still robust. Despite geopolitical tensions in the Middle East and Europe, the market now watches whether further supply increases will follow in the coming months. Now we are joined for this discussion with Shruti Das Gupta. She's an international relations expert joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Shruti, for joining us today. Good to see you. What impact could this bigger than expected output hike have on global petrol prices in the short term?
Greetings, Asuma. Thank you for inviting me. I believe that the increase in barrel is almost 100,000 barrels that they are promising during this time, and they have projected it as something that would benefit the summer crunch, as they have called it. This would also impact the American shale drilling, which have been going gung-ho, and the latest bite from that particular sector has said that they will now try to work lesser wells so that there is not an oversupply of oil. Now, Saudi Arabia has to walk a very fine line between supplying as well as the oil price. If the supply increases by a large amount, very suddenly, it might crash the oil prices, and the already deficient budget of Saudi Arabia, which has had to cancel a lot of its programs that were part of the its Prince Mohammed bin Salman's plans for the nation, will have already rolled some of them back. If the price drops really radically, it will affect their income from it. Apart from this particular aspect, we also need to understand Iranian oil is still not on the market, as well as Russian oil is not on the market. So supply is is really short, and demand is climbing. So this particular thing would probably bring down the oil prices to less than $60 per barrel, and it would be beneficial to a lot of nations, specifically those like India that are expecting to need this fuel price downward trend.
Thank you, Shruti, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next story. Myanmar's ruling junta has issued a rare call for cooperation from armed groups as it prepares for elections later this year. In a statement carried by state media, the military said it would welcome and accept armed factions that choose to operate within the framework of the law. The appeal comes amid mounting battlefield losses to ethnic minority forces and pro-democracy People's Defense Forces that emerged after the coup in 2021. But the National Unity Government, composed of ousted lawmakers, rejected the offer, calling it a deceptive move to legitimize a sham election. The junta says elections could be held in December or January, despite widespread violence and international condemnation. Now we go back to Shruti Dasgupta for this discussion. Shruti, thank you for staying with us. Why is the National Unity Government rejecting the elections as a sham? And what alternatives do they propose? And also, how should India respond to this?
Well, the junta regime is a pro-China regime, and the jade mines were under, like a lot of jade mining, rare earth extraction happening in Myanmar is benefiting the Chinese companies. The opposing factions, they are all trying to gain control of these access of resources, as well as they have large fault lines in terms of ethnicity. So the ethnic groups have bound together, formed rebel groups, and they're fighting it out between themselves for the last 5 years. Recent reports had also indicated that one of the groups had downed a Chinese-made aircraft, and they put up a review of it. The junta regime has rejected any of these claims. They've just said they've lost aircraft as such. So you can see that it is still at a head and at a boil. The elections that they keep talking about will probably be very heavily skewed and rigged. And that is why unless the junta regime gives up its power and answers to the kind of crimes that it has perpetrated in the nation, the other ethnic groups that have formed that are now named as rebel groups, they will continue to face an opposition from these rebel groups. India on its term is just waiting and watching. I do believe New Delhi invited earlier sometime this year a group of these Chin groups and the other groups that were warring factions in junta to come with the junta regime, to come and speak at New Delhi, and this is what actually happened there, nobody knows. But what we do understand is this is a direct way for India to counter the growing influence of China in this particular side of the continent, in Asia per se, and in Myanmar more particularly. So we are looking at it as a developing story. I do know that it is going to be a sham election if junta regime holds the election rather than an interim government coming in place and then doing this particular honor. But right now it is just a battle for resources, and the junta regime is selling out its people very badly.
Thank you, Shruti, for staying with us and sharing that insight. And you will stay with us for our next discussion. Now we move on to our next news. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Belgium has sent a positive signal to the European business community. During his meeting with Belgium's Prime Minister Bart de Wever, both sides agreed to strengthening exchanges and build deeper mutual trust with a shared goal of expanding economic cooperation. The visit, which is part of Wang's week-long European tour, highlights China's commitment to opening up and collaborating with Europe's key areas, including high-tech, green energy, culture, and education. Belgian business leaders have welcomed China's efforts to create more opportunities for foreign investors through policies such as reducing its negative list. Wang's European trip includes high-level strategic dialogues with the EU, Germany, France. The focus is on promoting stability, mutual benefits, and long-term partnerships between China and European nations, as Chinese and European companies increasingly seek opportunities in each other's markets. Here's what Bernard de Wit, chairman of Belgian Chinese Chamber of Commerce, had to say.
The message Minister Wang Yi is bringing is a message of peace, is a message of let's work together. There are things we can do together. There is space for more business between Belgium and China. So I think this is something very positive.
Now we're joined back by our guest Shruti Dasgupta. She's an international relations expert. Thank you, Shruti, for staying with us. How might new Chinese policies to open up markets benefit European businesses, especially in high-tech and green energy sectors?
Well, Chinese cooperation is absolutely essential for any green tech right now because they are the major stakeholders. They control 95% of the rare earth magnets industry and rare earth elements. So they, without which the green industry comes to a screeching halt. So when China goes ahead and meets up the European leaders and trade holders, they kind of give the signal that the licensing that they had put up earlier in this year, I think a month back, they had put up licensing for rare earth magnets to be exported out of China. They send the signal that they are ready to cooperate with Europe as long as they are willing to honor the sovereignty of China by not stealing the rare earth extraction secrets that it guards very heavily and is a major source of its control over the rare earth market. The green energy is an essential for the nation, with oil being the only other alternative. So green energy as well as EVs, electric vehicles, as well as solar panels, etc. They all need the supply of batteries for which this particular green rare earth magnets is an essential component. When they had China had implemented the policy for licensing, the world had cried foul. And right now they are slowly and steadily trying to strengthen their partnership and renegotiate terms of supply so that they could remain in control of the market and hold it at in a chokehold so that its dominance over the rare earth as well as EV market continues.
Thank you very much, Shruti Dasgupta, for joining us today and sharing your insight as an international relations expert. Now we move on to our next news. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is facing a major political crisis after Francisco Salazar, a senior official in his Socialist Party, resigned over sexual harassment allegations. The accusations were made by a party employee who claimed Salazar made inappropriate comments and attempted to initiate personal encounters while working at the Prime Minister's residence, Moncloa Palace. The resignation comes as Sanchez had hoped to shift focus from a broader corruption investigation within his party. Former PSOE official Santos Cerdán is in pre-trial detention on charges of orchestrating kickbacks in exchange for public contracts, a scandal that further threatens Sanchez's leadership. In his speech, Sanchez didn't address Salazar directly, but stressed that women must have the ability to report abuse through official channels. However, political turmoil deepened as protests erupted outside the PSOE headquarters. Sanchez remained defiant, including Castile-La Mancha Governor Emiliano Garcia Page sees this as one of the most serious challenges to Spain's democracy since the Franco era. With his government relying on a coalition of nationalist and far-left parties, Sanchez's ability to weather this storm remains uncertain. Now we're joined by our guest, Dr. Nur Nirwandi. She's a security analyst joining us live from Malaysia. Thank you, Dr. Nur, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, looking at this news in Spain, coming from Spain, how damaging could these sexual harassment allegations and Salazar's resignation be for Sanchez's credibility and leadership among his party?
I think any form of issues that happen to the world leader, it will potentially to give some negative image. However, as the political intersections of the global element happens, I think it is up to the local representation of law on how to see things works. But diplomatically, I think this is something that happens around some issues and situations, and we, as the observer of international relations, just have to wait and look what will be the potential damages, particularly on the image of the concepts of looking into the law and regulations of the domestic by the Spain jurisdictions of law by itself.
Thank you, Dr. Noon. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez has condemned Russia's biggest drone and missile attack yet in the 3-year war in Ukraine. Gutierrez said this in a statement referring to the assault on July 4th and called for a full, immediate and unconditional ceasefire. This came after reportedly hours-long Russian bombardments which sent Ukrainians scurrying for shelters across the country. According to reports, journalists in Kyiv heard drones buzzing over the capital and explosions ringing out throughout the night as Ukrainian air defense systems fended off the track. A statement issued by UN spokesman Stephanie Dujarric stated that the Secretary General is alarmed by the dangerous escalation and the growing number of civilian casualties. It also noted that attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international law and said that they must be stopped immediately. Now we're joined back by our guest for this discussion, Dr. Nur Nirwandi, security analyst. Thank you, Dr. Nur, for staying with us. Now, can the UN Secretary General's call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire have any real impact on the ground, looking at him calling for ceasefire also in Gaza, also in Ukraine, and also in the other places in the world?
I think if we look into the conflict that happens in Ukraine and in Gaza, it shows that the conflicts have been going on for quite some certain numbers of years. The conflicts by the Ukrainians and Russia itself also has been going on for almost around 3 years without any concrete unending material on how the conflict would be ended. So it's important for the United Nations, particularly to the Security Council, to overlook and to look into the elements on how the conflict would be solved in the context of diplomacy, and of course in the context much more better application towards the use of the Security Council. But however, we should know that in the context of understanding the process of United Nations regulations, ceasefire, and the process of ending the conflicts, the using of the Security Council, we have some little bit more harder and harsher approach because the representations of the Security Council by itself has a lot of various orientations by some certain superpower in it. But however, we hope that the conflict will end because both countries are assuming and using the Article 51 at the act of self-defense to defend themselves of using some certain military approaches for the conflicts. So I think it's quite inhumanitarian for any form of issues, and of course we would like to see the global peace happen, and we want the Security Council to take more firm action and want the diplomatic elements of both countries to be restored, and ending the war is something that people really hopes, and hopefully it will start off with a diplomatics and a good representation of ceasefire initiated by United Nations and comply by both leaders of the conflicts, which is Ukraine and Russia.
And Dr. Noor, building on that, what more can the international community do to protect civilians and uphold international law in this conflict?
I think if we look into the Gaza, it's basically a very inhumanitarian act that happens in Gaza people. It's been quite some time for quite so long already. So I think it's important for the world community to use diplomatically means to push the issues towards another level and ending the conflict towards, I would say, that very unilateral elements of decision made by Israel and aggressions by Israel towards the Gaza people have to be stopped. And this is what we think that should be looked into more serious in the form of international community. I think there'll be lots of protests going on, demonstrations around the world. But the most basic thing of settling the conflicts is look into the legality element that we have under the United Nations, legality element that we have under some representations of other law around the world. And it seems that none is working so far. And we do hope that with the international constant pressure, diplomatic pressure by all the countries around the world and by the people of the community, using some algorithm of the social media to push for any form of war to be stopped, particularly that really an operation against the Gaza people, we have a significant shift toward the conflicts, because this is something that we have to really look seriously, because thousand people is basically dying, been ousted from their home, and they really need a world attention, and hopefully the conflict can be solved and there will be an immediate ceasefire, and Palestine will be granted a sovereignty state, although they are not still be granting the sovereignty by United Nations, and basically they are just a form of full memberships of the United Nations just as an observer. So this is something that is not fair, and hopefully the world diplomatics international community will push forward for the unending resolving the conflicts between the Gaza and Israel permanently.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noor, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Winnie Byanyima, the head of UNAIDS, has issued a stark warning about the future of the global fight against HIV. At the UN International Development Summit in Seville, Spain, Byanyima revealed that U.S. cuts to AIDS funding could result in an additional 6 million HIV infections and 4 million AIDS-related deaths by 2029 if the funding loss continues. The most significant blow comes from the suspension of PEPFAR, the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, a program that has been crucial in providing HIV treatment, prevention, and care worldwide since its inception in 2003. The U.S. cuts have left a massive funding gap, jeopardizing vital services that have helped curb the epidemic over the last 2 decades. Byanyima, visibly shaken by the scale of the cuts, called the situation a deadly funding crisis, emphasizing that the global fight against HIV cannot succeed if the funding dries up. Byanyima remains determined to continue her work, calling for a shift away from charity-based aid towards a model of international solidarity. In the face of this crisis, Byanyima her message is clear: without a global effort to restore and increase funding for HIV programs, millions of lives are at risk. The time for action is now. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed into law a massive package of tax and spending cuts at the White House today. Trump signed the bill 1 day after Republican-controlled House of Representatives narrowly approved the signature legislation of the president's second term. The bill was passed with 218 votes to 214 after an emotional debate on the White House floor. It will reportedly fund Trump's immigration crackdown, make his 2017 tax cuts permanent, and is expected to knock millions of Americans off of health insurance. Trump also thanked House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune for leading the bill through the two houses of Congress. According to reports, the bill's passage amounts to a big win for Trump and his Republican allies, who have argued it will boost economic growth, while largely dismissing a nonpartisan analysis predicting it will add more than $3 trillion to the nation's $36.2 trillion debt. Now we go back to our discussion with Dr. Noor Nirwandi. He's a security analyst and psychops expert. Thank you, Dr. Noor, for staying with us. Now, could this major legislative win strengthen Trump's political position ahead of upcoming elections or weaken, according to you?
I think the basic elements that why the Trump signs the current legislative of what we call the importance of looking into the tax elements in US, basically is part of his manifesto. And it is also part aligned towards his approach of MAGA, making America great again. And increasingly, of course, it will have some significant effect towards the ones that opposing and of course the ones supporting the bills. But of course the main important things I think the Trump achievement is to look into how to crack down on the immigrants by looking into to expedite and to boost expenditure to curb immigration problems in US by looking into much more better security in the form context. And the tax itself will also bring some positive elements avenue to the US element where the representations of the tax will increase much more spending outfit for the American peoples. But nevertheless, there also be some concern that the tax will giving some elements of negativity impacts of economic, such as the disorientations of the spendings and the representations of the tax by itself, the disproportions of the tax itself will have a long deficits of US economy in the long future run. But I do believe this is something that the Trumps have been looking forward to do so, and in context of his political achievement, there will be some form of misorientation, there will be some form of missupport. But I think overall, the America will love to see on how the proportions of the tax being used to achieve the Americans' elements, in particularly the outfits of elements of American spending, and on how it could be used to curb immigrants and aligns with the Trump MAGA policy, which is making America great again.
And Dr. Noor, now staying on this and building on to your answer, how realistic are Republican claims that this package will boost economic growth despite adding trillions to the national debt?
I think if you look into the representation, there are some situations that we look into that, such as on the short-term boost, of course, especially to investments and the representations of wage and consumer sentiment. There will be also some looking into distribution of challenge on how it will benefit towards the wealthy taxpayers, social safety net, and the growth claim. There are a little bit of skeptical of growth claim because most independent economics mentioned that there will be some portion growth to look into the form of that. But in anyhow, if we look into on the overall perspective, we could see that there will be some short-term gains that will help to benefit the Americans' economics, which is form, of course, where we talk about tax cuts. We also talks about eliminating such form, other form of the increasing of the tax, and to boost the consumer confidence, investment, and it will definitely will boost GDP in the run. But this is the long-term risk. This is something situation that we talk that the congressional budgets in the context of the billions or involved trillions over the next decades, and maybe some form of spendings that we look into the representations of the fiscal outlook. There will be some global economic shift and the distributions of equity that we have to be looked. And these critics say that the amounts of the wealth transfer from the poor to the rich also will be something that we are worrying about. And I think there are some basically mix and mesh, and of course the mixture of orientation where the people are supporting and looking to the bill. But I do believe that the bill will deliver short-term benefits to the economic activity, but in the long run it have to be a cautious form of element, but in the context of giving the American boost, or basically the Trump representation of manifesto, curbing the immigrant, this will significantly giving Trump much more popularity by doing so in context of using this bill.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noor Nirwandi, for joining us and sharing your insight as security analyst and psyops expert. Now let us take a look at some stories from the world of entertainment. British rock band Oasis have officially ended their 16-year hiatus with a powerful reunion concert in Cardiff, Wales, marking a moment fans around the world never thought they'd see. The Gallagher brothers, Liam and Noel, who have been estranged since the band's bitter split in 2009, shared the stage at Principality Stadium in front of more than 60,000 fans, while the siblings largely kept their distance on stage. A brief handshake sparked hope for a new chapter for the iconic duo. Ozzy Osbourne takes the stage in Birmingham tonight for his final ever performance as frontman of Black Sabbath. The Back to the Beginning concert at Villa Park reunites him with original bandmates Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward. For the first time in 2 decades, a crowd of 40,000 is expected, with millions watching online. Sharon Osbourne has confirmed this will be Ozzy's last show, calling it his full stop. Profits will go to cure Parkinson's and Birmingham's Children's Hospital. The 59th Carolee Vary International Film Festival opened with a heartfelt tribute to late Czech acting icon Jiří Bartoška, who passed away earlier this year at 78 years old. The pillar of the festival since 1994, Bartoška was celebrated through a documentary titled "We've Got to Frame It," which captured a personal conversation with him from July 2021. The opening night also featured a poignant moment in the festival trailer, where actor Bolek Polivka toasted an empty chair in honor of his old friend, a quiet but moving farewell to the man who helped shape the festival's modern identity. In a stunning twist for K-pop world, fictional bands from the animated Netflix film K-pop Demon Hunters have surpassed global superstars BTS and Blackpink on the US music charts. The movie, which has garnered over 33 million views in just 2 weeks, features 2 rival groups, the all-female Hunter X and the demon boy band Saja Boys. Their songs Your Idol and Golden Now rank first and second on the US Spotify chart, outperforming any real K-pop group in history. The soundtrack has also stormed into the Billboard 200's top 10, marking the biggest soundtrack debut of the year. Horror movies are taking center stage in global entertainment landscape, with films like Sinners and Final Destination Bloodlines dominating the US box office and driving audience numbers higher. Industry data from Comscore shows horror now makes up to 17% of ticket sales in North America, up from just 11% last year. Experts say this shift comes as audiences tire of sequels and superhero franchises, with horror offering fresh stories, lower budgets, and big returns. Directors like Ryan Coogler and Guillermo del Toro are leading the trend, while streaming platforms like Netflix are seeing massive viewership in horror series such as The Walking Dead. From cinemas to streaming, fear is fast becoming the most bankable genre in entertainment. Well, now that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.